Hello, and welcome to another session of Reformed Thinking. It's just great to have you with us as we open up the archives again.
It's good to be back.
We are continuing our walk through what I think is one of the most demanding texts we've encountered in quite a while. We're looking at Jonathan Edwards' sermon series on 1 Corinthians 13.
The famous charity and its fruits.
That's the one.
And you used the right word there,
Yeah.
demanding. I think a lot of people, they come to 1 Corinthians 13 and they see it as this soft, poetic text.
Oh, absolutely. It's wedding season material.
Right. It's read at weddings. It's on greeting cards. You see it on decorative pillows. But then you sit down with someone like Edwards and you realize this chapter is actually a sledgehammer.
A sledgehammer to the ego. Yeah.
It is. It's a really rigorous dismantling of our default selfishness. It's a blueprint.
It is. It's not poetry. He treats it as policy, a policy for the Christian life. And to orient you, our listener, specifically where we are today, we're examining the sermon called Charity Disposes Us to Do Good. The verse is 1 Corinthians 13.4, and the specific phrase is just two words, is kind.
Charity suffereth long and is kind. And that context is, well, it's everything here. In our last deep dive, we spent the whole time on the first half of that.
Suffereth long.
Right, which is all about, in a sense, a kind of passivity. It was about meekness, bearing injuries, taking the hits the world gives you without hitting back.
It was about what you don't do when you're provoked.
Exactly. But today,
The coin flips completely.
it does. We move from that passive bearing of evil to the active doing of good. Edwards makes this point, and it's a sharp one, that you can't just be harmless.
Right.
A rock is harmless. A corpse is harmless.
Yeah.
That's not the goal.
Yeah.
A Christian has to be actively good. So that phrase is kind. It implies a kind of kinetic energy.
A movement.
A movement toward your neighbor. A positive action.
And that's really our mission for this discussion. We're going to analyze Edwards' argument that a true Christian spirit requires active, free, and very tangible beneficence. And I want to warn you, our listener, right up front.
Edwards is going to push into areas of your life you might feel are private. He's coming for your wallet. He's coming for your business dealing.
Oh, he certainly is. He's very practical. And he structures the whole argument by looking at, first, the nature of doing good, then the objects of that good, so who we do it to, and finally, the manner in which it must be done.
And I think it's necessary we set the theological tone right from the start. For Edwards, and really for the Reformed tradition as a whole,
Yeah.
this isn't just about being, nice.
Nices. Well, it's far too weak a word. It's an empty calorie word.
It is.
This is about reflecting the very character of God. God is the fountain of all good. So if we claim to have his spirit living in us, we must by necessity become fountains of good as well.
And if the flow stops.
If the flow stops, or if it never starts, Edwards would say that raises some very serious questions about the source. Okay, so let's unpack this. Segment 1 in his sermon covers what he calls the nature of the duty. He defines it very simply at first, just doing good to others. But then he immediately creates this hierarchy that I found really fascinating.
He does. He splits it into two main categories. There's doing good to the soul, and there's doing good to the body.
And he's very clear on which one takes precedence.
Oh, absolutely. He calls doing good to the soul the most excellent way. There's no ambiguity there.
And that makes perfect sense logically. I mean, if you believe in an eternal soul, then helping someone for eternity is infinitely more valuable than helping them for, 80 years?
Infinitely. Edwards argues you could give a man all the kingdoms of the world, all the riches of the universe, but if you haven't done anything to aid his soul, you've actually given him a pretty pitiable gift in the grand scheme of things.
It's a short-term gain for an eternal loss.
Right. But what I really appreciate about Edwards here is how practical he gets about what this spiritual good looks like. He doesn't just say, preach at them.
No, he breaks it down into very specific actions. He lists things like instruction, counsel, and warning. He talks about taking pains to teach the ignorant.
And that phrase, taking pains, that stood out to me too.
It did for me as well.
It implies that teaching someone the truth isn't just about having the right answer in your head. It's about the effort, the labor of transferring that knowledge patiently.
It means it's probably going to be inconvenient. It's going to cost you time.
It requires patience. It requires sometimes lowering yourself to the level of the learner, finding a way to communicate that connects with them. And then he moves on to reproof.
Yes. The lost art of reproof.
It really is a lost art in our modern culture, isn't it? We're so hesitant to tell anyone that they are, to use Edwards' phrase, out of the way of duty.
We see it as judgmental. We think, it's none of my business, or who am I to say anything?
But Edwards lists correcting those who are out of the way as a primary act of kindness, a spiritual kindness.
The analogy that comes to mind is if you see someone, a child, walking toward a busy street, the kindest thing you can do is shout. It's to grab their arm. The cruelest thing you can do is to say, well, it's their choice, and just watch.
Absolutely. Silence in that moment isn't kindness, it's negligence. It's a failure of love.
Yeah.
But, and this is a huge but for Edwards.
Yes.
He says, for any of this, the instruction, the counsel, the reproof, for any of it to work, it has to be backed up by something else.
By example.
By example. He says, without a good example, your words are, and I quote, likely in vain.
Think about the psychology of that. It's so true. If I'm giving you financial advice, but my own finances are a total wreck,
You're not going to listen.
I have zero credibility. If I'm telling you to be patient with your kids and I'm constantly yelling at mine,
Your words just bounce off their hollow. Edwards, the example gives force to the instruction. It validates the message. It shows that you actually believe what you're saying enough to live it.
so if we want to do spiritual good to others, the first place we have to look is our own life.
It has to be.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we're just hypocrites. We're just making noise.
And he gets even more specific about the targets of the spiritual good. He's not just talking in generalities. He lists, for example, reclaiming vicious persons.
That's a strong term.
Yeah.
Vicious. We'd probably say something softer today.
We would. We'd say people making poor choices or something. But he's direct. He also talks about persuading neglectors of the sanctuary.
People who don't go to church.
Right. Persuading them to attend, to come under the means of grace. And then he talks about awakening secure and careless sinners.
Oof. That category is frightening to me. The secure sinner.
Why so?
Because it's the person who isn't in open, scandalous sin. They're just comfortable. They think they're fine. They're completely numb to their own spiritual danger. And Edwards is saying that real kindness sometimes involves disturbing that false security.
It's like being the doctor who has to give the bad news. You have to tell them about the cancer so that they'll accept the treatment.
That's a perfect analogy. Kindness is waking them up to their misery so they can find the remedy, which is Christ.
But it's not all negative. It's not all warning. He balances this. He also talks about comforting the saints.
Yes, this is the one another aspect of the Christian life within the church. He mentions helping one another out of dull frames. I just love that old Puritan language.
A dull frame. We all know what that feels like.
You know those days you just feel spiritually flat? The fog rolls in, your prayers feel like they're hitting the ceiling.
That's a dull frame.
And Edward says it is our duty, an act of kindness, to help pull each other out of that, to come alongside a brother or a sister and help them in their temptations, help them in their spiritual darkness.
You highlighted a phrase in your notes that I think is just beautiful. Fellow helpers on their way to glory.
That's the image, isn't it? We're a company of pilgrims on a journey. And some are limping, some have gotten lost in the fog, some have fallen asleep by the side of the road. Kindness is the collective effort to get everyone up the mountain together.
That's a powerful picture.
But Edwards, being the wise and grounded pastor he was, knows we're not just disembodied souls floating around.
No, we are embodied souls.
We have stomachs that get hungry and backs that get cold and bank accounts that get empty. So he moves from the spiritual to the physical in the next part of the sermon.
This is where, as they say, the rubber meets the road, or maybe where the wallet meets the need. He starts talking about the duty regarding outward goods.
Temporal assistance, helping with external calamities, he calls them, things like hunger, thirst, sickness, being in prison, the basic human needs.
He frames this really broadly, though. It's not just, disaster relief after a hurricane. He says we should look to further a neighbor's estate, substance, or good name.
That last one, good name, is interesting, isn't it?
It is. So defending someone's reputation is an act of charity on par with giving them food.
In Edwards' view, yes. A good reputation is a valuable temporal asset. It affects your ability to work, to have relationships. So if you hear slander or gossip and you refuse to pass it on, or better yet, you actively shut it down.
Or you speak well of someone who's being misunderstood.
You are doing them a tangible, outward good, just as if you'd handed them a $20 bill.
And Edwards, he draws this really tight connection between the physical and the spiritual here. He doesn't see them as two separate, disconnected silos.
No, he's much too holistic for that.
Mm-hmm.
He argues that the outward kindness, the physical help, actually opens the way for the spiritual counsel to be heard.
That's such a practical, almost psychological observation.
It's just common sense, really. If you're starting, you can't concentrate on a sermon. If my roof is leaking and my kids are cold, and you come to my door to talk about my soul, but you ignore my leaking roof.
I'm not going to be very receptive. I'm going to think you don't actually care about me. You just care about your project of converting me.
Exactly. Edwards says the outward kindness gives our spiritual words full force. It proves our sincerity. It earns us the right to be heard. It shows we see them as a whole person, not just a soul to be saved.
So how do we do this? How do we contribute these outward goods? He breaks it down into 3 specific modes.
Yes. Giving, doing, and suffering.
Okay, let's take those one by one. Giving seems pretty obvious.
It is. He quotes Luke, "Give, and it shall be given unto you." This is sharing your possessions, your money, your resources. It's writing the check, putting cash in the plate.
Straightforward enough. The next one is doing. He calls it laboring.
Right. And he points to Paul in 1 Thessalonians talking about his labor and travail. This is where you don't just send a check from a distance. You roll up your own sleeves.
You use your body.
You use your energy for their benefit. You help them move house. You fix their broken fence. You give them a ride to the doctor. You expend your personal physical effort.
And then there's the third one, and I think for most of us, this is the hardest one by far, suffering.
This is Galatians 6.2. Bear ye one another's burdens. And Edwards takes it all the way to 1 John 3.1 scene that we got to lay down our lives for the brethren.
So this is the truly sacrificial element.
This is where real charity starts to hurt the giver. It's not just inconvenient, it's costly. If your kindness never costs you anything, never costs you comfort or sleep or emotional energy or social standing, it might not be the biblical charity Edwards is describing here.
It's about taking a weight off of someone else's shoulders and deliberately placing it onto your own.
That's the essence of it. It's a willing participation in their burden.
That's a heavy thought. It's one thing to give from your surplus, from what's left over. It's another thing entirely to give from your sustenance or to give of your very self, your time, your energy, your life.
It is. But that's the model of Christ, isn't it?
Yeah.
He didn't just send resources from heaven. He came. He took on the suffering. He bore our burden.
Which leads us perfectly into the next big question he tackles. Who? Who are the recipients of all this giving, doing, and suffering?
Who gets this help?
Segment 3, the objects of kindness. Or, to put it in the classic way, who is my neighbor?
And of course, he goes straight to the parable of the Good Samaritan. The answer is, essentially, anyone in your path who has a need.
He categorizes the objects of our charity in a way that just systematically removes all of our loopholes, all our excuses for inaction.
He's very good at that.
First, he says we must do good to both the good and the bad.
And here's the theological anchor for that. He says we must imitate our Heavenly Father, who sendeth rain on the just and on the unjust.
That's a stark way to put it.
It is. Think about it. If God only provided sunlight and food and oxygen to the people who loved him and obeyed him, most of the world would be dead by lunchtime.
A sobering thought.
But it's true. God is wildly, indiscriminately generous with his common grace. And Edwards' point is simple. We who are called to be like him must imitate that indiscriminate generosity.
And this is where the big objection always comes in. We look at someone and we say, but he's a bad person, or she's immoral, he's proud, he's profane.
She'll just waste the money on drugs. He doesn't deserve my help. We've all had those thoughts. Edwards anticipates every one of them. He acknowledges, yes, there are people with what he calls very evil properties. He lists them. Proud, immoral, covetous despisers of God.
So he's not naive. He sees their sin. What's his conclusion?
He flips the script on us completely. He says these bad qualities are not reasons to withhold good from them. In fact, he says they are reasons to be more diligent to do them good.
Okay, you have to break that down. How does someone's badness make them a higher priority for kindness? That seems counterintuitive.
Because the ultimate goal isn't just to fix their temporary problem. The goal, for Edwards, is always to win them to Christ. If they are mired in sin, they are far from God. They are in grave, eternal danger. Your kindness might be the only bridge they have back to considering righteousness.
So the kindness is a tool of evangelism.
It's a gospel witness. If you cut them off because of their sin, you just confirm them in their worldview that Christians are judgmental and hypocritical. But if you show them a grace that they know, deep down they do not deserve, you disrupt their whole world. You force them to ask why.
That's powerful. It stops being about whether they merit the help, and it starts being about what their soul needs.
And grace is never, ever about merit. If it were, none of us would qualify.
Then he moves to another pairing. Friends and enemies. Friends, he says, well, we have a natural obligation to them. That's easy enough. But enemies.
Enemies is the distinctively Christian command. That's Matthew 5.44. Love your enemies, bless them that curse you, do good to them that hate you.
Edwards is so firm on this. He says the only retaliation permitted to a Christian is, and I love this phrase, overcoming evil with good.
That's such a countercultural, almost militant strategy.
Right.
The world strategy is if someone hits you, you hit them back harder. You establish dominance.
Right, an eye for an eye.
And Edwards says, no, the Christian strategy is if someone curses you, you bless them. If they take your coat, you give them your cloak also. It's an aggressive, weaponized form of kindness. You totally disarm your enemy because you refuse to play by the normal rules of animosity.
You short-circuit the whole system of retribution.
You do. And then he tackles the third category, which might be the most relatable for many of us, the thankful and the unthankful.
This is a big one for anyone who has ever tried to help another human being.
Anyone in ministry, anyone who has ever volunteered, anyone who's ever given to someone on the street.
The objection is so common. I helped them last time and they didn't even say thank you. Or even worse, I helped them and they turned around and slandered me.
We have all felt that stink.
Hmm?
You go out of your way, you sacrifice for someone, and they respond with entitlement or resentment or just nothing. And your first instinct is to say, that's it, I'm done, never again.
You wash your hands of them. So what does Edwards say to that very real, very human feeling?
He is brutally blunt. He says that objection shows a want of acquaintance with Christianity.
Ouch.
In other words, if you think ingratitude is a valid reason to stop showing kindness, you fundamentally do not understand the gospel.
That hurts because it's true.
It's a direct hit to our pride. He points to Luke 6.35, where Jesus himself says that God is kind to the unthankful and to the evil. If God stopped being kind to us the moment we were unthankful, where would any of us be?
In big trouble.
We'd all be in very big trouble. So our standard for giving is not the recipient's reaction. Our standard is God's action toward us.
We're not playing to the audience of the person we're helping. We're playing to an audience of one.
Precisely. Which moves us neatly into his next section, segment 4, the manner of doing good. Because it's not just what you do or who you do it to, it's how you do it that matters.
And the key word he focuses on here is freely.
Charity disposes us freely to do good. If it's forced, it's a tax, not charity. If it's done reluctantly, it produces bitterness, not love. It has to be free.
And he gives 3 specific requirements for what this free action looks like. The first is that it must not be mercenary.
A mercenary, a soldier of fortune, someone who works for pay. A mercenary fights for whoever offers the highest bid. Edwards is saying our kindness cannot be a transaction like that.
We can't do good as a kind of spiritual return on investment scheme.
Right. We can't do good expecting a direct payback from the person we help. He references that passage in Luke 14 where Jesus talks about throwing a feast.
Don't invite your friends who can pay you back.
Right. He says, call the poor, the maimed, the lame, the blind. Why? Because they cannot recompense thee. That's the test.
So if you only invite people to dinner who you know can invite you back to an even nicer dinner later.
That's not charity. That's social networking. That's just business. Charity is giving to the person who can offer you absolutely nothing in return, no money, no improved social status, no favors they could do for you down the line.
Your action must be motivated by love for them and love for God, not by temporal interest or honor or your own profit.
The recompense, Jesus says, is at the resurrection of the just. The payback is in a different currency on a different timeline.
Okay, so not mercenary. The second requirement for doing good freely is that it must be done cheerfully or heartily.
God loveth a cheerful giver. That's 2 Corinthians 9.7. Edwards makes a huge distinction here between the outward act of giving and the inward disposition of the heart while giving.
He contrasts it with doing things grudgingly. You know that feeling when you give, but you let out a big theatrical sigh while you're doing it.
Or you hand over the help, but you make sure the person knows what a massive inconvenience it is for you. Well, I guess I can help, but it means I'll have to cancel my plans.
I hope you appreciate this.
Yes. That's the opposite of cheerful giving. Edwards points to Deuteronomy 15.10, where God commands them, thine heart shall not be grieved when thou givest unto him.
The internal emotional state of the giver actually matters to God.
It matters immensely. Edwards would argue that if you give $1 million to the poor, but you hate every second of it, and you resent the people you're helping, well, the poor get the money, which is good for them, but you get no spiritual benefit from the act. The act is hollow because the heart isn't in it.
That's a very high bar. It requires us to actually want the good of the other person. It's not just to want the alleviation of our own guilt for not helping.
It requires a heart that has been changed to one that delights in showing mercy because it has received so much mercy.
So, not mercenary and done cheerfully. The third requirement is that we must do it liberally or bountifully.
The opposite of what he calls scant and sparing.
That verse in Deuteronomy again, thou shalt open thine hand wide unto thy brother, not just crack it open a little bit.
Exactly. This challenges our natural tendency to do the bare minimum. We calculate what is the absolute least I can give in this situation to not look bad.
To satisfy the obligation.
Right. And Edwards says the Christian spirit doesn't ask that question. The Christian spirit asks, how much can I pour out for the good of my neighbor? It's the principle of sowing and reaping he brings in. If you sow sparingly, you'll reap sparingly. If you want a bountiful harvest of God's grace and blessing in your life, you sow bountifully into the lives of others.
Okay, so we have the act, the object, and the manner. Now in segment 5, Edwards makes the critical theological link. He asks the why question. Why is this act of doing of good the necessary evidence of a true Christian spirit?
And this is so crucial, especially for listeners in the Reformed tradition. We believe we are saved by faith alone, through grace alone. So why this intense, unrelenting focus on works?
Is he teaching salvation by works?
Not at all. He's teaching that works are the verification of faith. He argues that the very essence of Christian love is benevolence. That's just a fancy word for goodwill, a desire for the good of the person you love.
Okay, a desire. But desires can just stay in our heads.
And that's his point. He says the only conclusive evidence of the will is the act. You can say, I will to go to the grocery store all afternoon, but if you're still sitting on the couch 4 hours later, you didn't actually will it. You just had a fleeting thought about it.
And he goes right to the book of James for this. James 2.15:16. If you say to a cold and hungry brother, be warmed and filled, but you don't give him any clothes or any food, what good is that?
It's profitless. It's just empty air. Edwards is saying that sincerity is proven by deeds, not by words or feelings alone. This connects directly to the Reformed understanding of the fruit of the Spirit. Works don't save us, but they are the necessary, unavoidable evidence of a faith that has saved us.
So it's a diagnostic test.
It's not a checklist to earn your way into heaven. It's a mirror you hold up to your life to see if heaven has begun to take root in you.
All right, now we get to the part of the sermon that I suspect might make some listeners, well, squirm a little.
Segment 6, Reproof and Warning.
This is where he identifies the spirits that stand in opposition to this spirit of charity.
He names 2 of them. First, the malicious spirit, which actively wants to do evil to others. And second, and I think this is where he spends most of his time, the selfish spirit, the spirit that is wholly bent on its own interest.
And under that banner of the selfish spirit, he gets laser focused on something very specific. Our economic lives, our business ethics.
He calls out the grasping and avaricious spirit.
And this is where Edwards steps right out of the 18th century pulpit and stands in the middle of the 21st century marketplace. His insights here are almost frighteningly relevant to modern capitalism.
They really are.
He lists very specific sins of business. The first one is taking every opportunity to get the maximum from a neighbor.
Just think about that for a second. In many business schools, maximizing profit is taught as the primary, if not sole, duty of a business. Edwards comes along and says that if it comes at the expense of your neighbor's well-being, it's a sin.
He talks about asking more for something than it's actually worth, just because you know the buyer is in a bind and you can get it.
That's the definition of price gouging. Taking advantage of someone's necessity or their ignorance. If there's a disaster and I'm the only one selling bottled water and I decide to charge $100 a bottle, the market might call that supply and demand.
Edwards calls it a grasping, unchristian spirit.
Right. And then he flips it over to the buyer's side, too. He talks about the sin of grinding and pinching sellers down to the absolute lowest price possible.
This one hits home. We all love a bargain. We brag about how much we were able to talk someone down on a price.
We do. But Edwards forces us to ask a different question. Are you negotiating so hard that you are forcing the price below its true value? Are you depriving the maker, the seller, of a just reward for their labor just so you can save a few dollars?
He's channeling the Old Testament prophets, grinding the face of the poor.
It's a refusal to pay what something is truly worth. The underlying attitude is that my money is more valuable than your livelihood. Edwards suggests that a Christian, when buying something, should be happy to pay a fair price, a just price, even if they know they could have maybe bullied their way to a slightly lower one.
That is a radical financial theology. It reframes every single transaction we make. The goal isn't just, did I get the best possible deal for me? It's, was this transaction just and kind to the person on the other side of the counter?
It reminds us that the economy isn't an abstract machine. It's made of people. It's made of neighbors whom we are commanded by God to love. And you cannot truly love your neighbor and exploit him at the same time. The two are mutually exclusive.
Whew. After laying down that heavy conviction, Edwards moves into his final section, segment 7, exhortation and motivation. Basically, why on earth should we do all this? It sounds exhausting. It sounds incredibly costly. Why should we live this way?
And he offers several powerful, compelling motivations. The first one he talks about is the sheer honor of it. He says doing good makes a person a blessing in the world, just like God promised to Abraham.
He uses these grand comparisons. He says benefactors are like the great kings of the East, or even like the heavenly bodies, the sun, the moon, the stars.
I appreciate that imagery so much. The sun doesn't check if you deserve its light before it shines on you. It doesn't send you a bill. It just pours out light and warmth freely. Edward says when we do good freely, we become like the stars. We become like the angels. And highest of all, we become like God himself, who is the inexhaustible fountain of all good.
So it's the highest dignity a human can aspire to be a source of blessing.
It is. Then he brings in the golden rule, a much simpler motivation.
Do to others what you would have them do to you.
It's a simple mirror test. We all approve of it when others are kind and liberal and generous to us. We celebrate that. So, be that person for others. When you're in trouble, do you want people to be stingy and critical and hesitant? No. You want them to be generous and quick to help. So do that.
And then, of course, what is maybe the central motivation for a Christian? Gratitude for divine kindness.
This is the engine. This is the evangelical heartbeat of the whole thing. We are moved to kindness because of the kindness shown to us. We look at what God has done, his daily mercies new every morning. But specifically, we look to the gospel.
We look to Christ, who gave the greatest possible gift himself, and who, though he was rich, became poor to make us spiritually rich.
And he did all of this while we were his enemies, while we were evil and unthankful. If we truly deeply grasp the gospel, if we understand what it cost the Son of God to save us, our natural tight-fisted selfishness should just melt away. How can we possibly hoard our little temporal goods when we've been given such an infinite spiritual treasure?
And finally, he's not afraid to talk about the promise of rewards. And this is where, we have to be careful not to sound like prosperity preachers.
Right, it's not a transactional formula.
But the Bible is full of promises of reward for the righteous.
It is, and Edwards doesn't shy away from those texts. He quotes Jesus, "It is more blessed to give than to receive." There is a real temporal happiness and blessing that comes from a life of generosity.
He uses that beautiful metaphor from Ecclesiastes about casting your bread upon the waters.
And at first it seems lost. It sinks. It disappears from view. But the text says, you will find it after many days. It takes root and it returns a harvest. Edwards says giving is like lending to the Lord. That's a concept from Proverbs.
When you give to the poor, you're making a loan directly to God.
And Edwards notes, God is a very reliable debtor. He always pays back, and usually with interest.
He says providence often prospers the charitable, even in this life.
And again, this isn't a mechanical prosperity gospel formula. Bad things still happen to good people. But it is a general principle of the way God has ordered his world. The liberal soul shall be made fat. But even if we don't see the full return in this life, Edwards' ultimate focus is the eternal reward.
Laying up for yourselves treasures in heaven where moth and rust do not destroy.
The recompense at the resurrection of the just. That's the long game. The Christian is investing in an economy that will outlast Wall Street and every earthly currency. We're transferring our assets bit by bit into a kingdom that cannot be shaken.
So as we start to wrap up this deep dive into Edwards' sermon, let's just try to summarize the main thrust. The mission here was to see that a true Christian spirit cannot be passive, it must be active.
It can't be dormant, no. It has to flow out. It has to manifest in both spiritual care teaching, counseling, reproving, and intangible physical aid.
Through giving and laboring and even suffering for others.
And it has to be aimed at everyone, the good, the bad, your friends, your enemies, the people who thank you, and the people who spit on you.
And the manner of it must be free. Not as a transaction, not grudgingly, but cheerfully and bountifully.
as a joyful reflection of the God who has been so bountiful toward us.
And if we look at our lives and we find this is lacking,
Then Edwards would say we have cause to examine ourselves to see if we are truly in the faith. We may lack the primary evidence of the Spirit's work in our hearts, but if we do see the Spirit in us, even imperfectly,
then we see the evidence that we are beginning to be conformed to the image of Christ, who is the perfect embodiment of this active, self-giving kindness.
we reflect the very nature of God.
I want to leave you, our listener, with a final provocative thought to mull over this week. We spent some time on those challenging points about business ethics. Edwards suggests that our financial life, how we buy and sell, how we negotiate, how we handle our money, isn't a separate category from our spiritual life.
Now, for him, it's a direct theological test.
So the question to leave you with is this. Does your financial theology match your Sunday theology? When you leave the church building, does the sermon on loving your neighbor actually follow you into the marketplace on Monday morning?
That is the question to end on. A tough one.
Thank you for joining us on Reformed Thinking. We hope to see you next time.
Goodbye for now.